June 18th, 1815. Before dawn breaks, a thin rain has already turned the fields outside the village of Waterloo into a mirror of mud. Somewhere in that wet gray, a man who once ruled Europe walks toward a destiny he cannot fully see. He is Napoleon Bonaparte, the little corporal who became emperor, who crowned himself and rewrote Europe's laws. He who, a few years earlier, sent armies from Lisbon to Moscow now stands on a small, muddy ridge. 3 years ago, he was exiled to Elba. In a gamble that stunned kings, he slipped away, marched to Paris, and won back a nation in what became the 100 Days. Men who had cheered him now marched with him again. Worn veterans, conscripts, boys with mud-chapped faces. Opposite him stands Arthur Wellesley, the Duke of Wellington, steady as a bastion. He remembers Waterloo from the other side. Disciplined lines, British squares, a calm that does not flinch. And farther east, like thunder on the horizon, the Prussian army under Blücher trudges back from Ligny, late but alive. By mid-morning, the rain eases. Cannons will speak, flags will splatter with mud. One decision will tilt an entire continent. This is not just a battle of musket and steel. It is a test of a man who carried Europe on his shoulders and the armies that loved him, and of those who would finally stop him. In 3 acts, rise, return, and ruin, history has gathered on this muddy stage. The curtain lifts. Napoleon began not in a palace, but on a rocky Mediterranean isle, Corsica. A boy with a thin jacket, a quick mind, and a hunger the battlefield could feed. From artillery cadet to the hero of Toulon, then Italy, he moved like lightning. At Lodi, he rode at the head of a column. Soldiers later called him the Little Corporal, not for size, but for how he shared their danger. He read maps the way others read scripture, bold plans, rapid movement. His men trusted him because he went first. A cuirassier ordering a charge once later said, "He was with us, not above us." Power followed victory. In 1799, he seized the Republic in the coup of 18 Brumaire. By 1804, he crowned himself emperor. Not just a general, but a maker of laws, schools, and new Europe. His climb was faster than most could follow, brilliant and restless. But every summit draws a horizon, pride, endless campaigns, and the long shadow of risk that would one day meet mud and cannon at Waterloo. Napoleon's Empire. Victory made Napoleon emperor, but power forced him to build a state. Napoleon stitched an empire not just with cannons, but with laws, schools, and roads. He moved fast. The Napoleonic Code turned scattered customs into one book of civil law. Lycées trained officers, clerks, teachers. Prefects reorganized provinces. For many citizens, the revolution's chaos became order. But building empires costs men and money. The very problems that would test him on the fields of Russia, and finally at Waterloo. The turning point, the Russian catastrophe. In the summer of 1812, Napoleon brought the Grande Armée, a force of roughly 600,000. They advanced fast, but Russian strategy was patience, retreat, draw fire, and burn what could supply the invader. In camp, a grenadier wrote home and, to keep the letter from freezing, tucked it inside his coat. Another man burned his own cart and blankets to warm dying comrades. They watched the flames like a funeral. They reached Moscow, but Moscow was ash. The city offered no food, only ruined houses and smoldering markets. Napoleon stayed, waiting for a political capitulation that never came. Winter fell, supply lines snapped, disease, hunger, and cold killed more than cannon. At the Berezina, the retreat nearly unraveled. Pontoon bridges jammed, men and wagons jammed in chaos. That crossing sealed the catastrophe. From 600,000 marched, fewer than 100,000 would stagger home. The myth of invincibility cracked. Europe smelled weakness, coalitions reformed, and the emperor who had remade nations now carried the first deep wound that would lead to exile, return, and Waterloo. First fall, Abdication, and Elba. April 1814. The roar of empire becomes a whisper. Paris, once shouting "Vive l'Empereur," holds its breath. Coalitions closed in. Generals begged for more time. The city could not be held. Inside Fontainebleau, a worn Napoleon signed away the crown. A pen where once was a sword. By treaty, he was given sovereignty, not of Europe, but of a tiny isle, Elba. The emperor who led millions now ruled a few hundred guards and the sound of the sea. Exile felt like an end, but exile also became a pause. The island would hold him briefly. The world he remade would not forget. A return was possible, and history was not finished. The return, the 100 days. Exile should have been an ending. Instead, it became the prologue. He slipped from Elba on a handful of ships and into legend. He marched inland, not with imperial banners, but with a bold stare and a promise. At Grenoble and Lyon, units sent to stop him instead cried, "Vive l'Empereur," and folded into his ranks. Men who had worn Bourbon cockades turned their faces and joined the march to Paris. In Paris, the throne toppled. Louis XVIII fled. Napoleon rode into a capital that welcomed him like a lost son. For one heady moment, the empire seemed reborn. But this was a gamble against time. The 100 days was not peace rebuilt. It was a sprint toward one final test. Europe would not sit idle. The stage for Waterloo was already being set. Road to Waterloo. June 15th to 17th, 1815. Europe narrows to a handful of roads and one wet field. Armies move like predators circling. Every march is a decision. Napoleon raced to divide the Allied armies, strike Wellington before Blucher could join him. He trusted speed and timing. His staff argued routes. Couriers sprinted on cracked roads. On the ground, soldiers tightened damp boots and patched muskets. A young conscript wrote a line he never finished. "If I die, tell mother I..." The campaign was maps and men, and both frayed under march. Wellington held a defensive chessboard. Ridges, farmhouses, Hougoumont and La Haye-Saint as anchors. He refused open battle until his lines held and Prussian muskets could thunder from the east. By the night before, the field was a patchwork of tents, tired eyes, and prayer. Mud would turn cavalry into lumber and make the hour of decision cruel. The next day, strategy would meet human endurance, and history would tip. The Battle of Waterloo. June 18th, 1815. Mud, iron, and an entire continent watching. Two armies face one field. One man hopes to rewrite fate. Morning opens slow. Hougoumont is a furnace of skirmishes. Farm walls become fortresses. La Haye-Saint, a lone farmhouse, is fought for like a city. Wellington strings his lines across the ridge. Every farmhouse is a peg holding his defense. A British private later wrote of a square that would not break. Men standing, bayonets outward, while horses slammed into steel. On the French side, a grenadier watched a Prussian column appear on the horizon and felt a hope tilt into fear. Napoleon commits his finest. The Imperial Guard, the army's heart, the last terrible hope. They advance like a living wall. Wellington's lines hold. Then, from the east, thunder that is not cannon but footfalls. Blucher's Prussians arrive late, stubborn as cliffs, their muskets open on the French flank. The field that once promised victory becomes a trap. The Guard falters and then breaks. Napoleon rides through a field of spent men and failed plans. By dusk, the dream is over. By night, a prisoner of history. The battlefield cools. An emperor's options shrink to one: abdicate and leave not to a neighboring isle, but to a rock in the Atlantic, Saint Helena. After defeat, he tried to shelter memory, letters, orders, explanations. Europe reassembled borders. For many, victory was a return to home. For others, occupation and grief. On Saint Helena, he dictated fragments of the story he wanted told. A companion later recalled how he would rise at dawn, insisting on dictation, as if to lock his voice to the record. Exile was not the cold public end of Elba. It was lonelier. Ships, guards, and the endless horizon. The man who had remade Europe watched a world where his laws and roads persisted, even as his throne was gone. He died far from home in 1821, but his civil code, administrative reforms, and the reshaping of Europe's political map endured. The empire was broken, its ideas were not. An emperor fell, but the world he shaped continued to turn. Mud became memory. Memory became law. Law shaped lives. History keeps the shadow. If you want more cinematic history, subscribe and don't miss the next episode. Now, it's your turn. If Waterloo was Napoleon's last act, whose fault was it? Comment below.